Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our online seed starting workshop. Kyle Rittenberg, our urban farm manager, is going to be leading us through some wonderful activities today. We want to give you a few minutes, especially some people might be dealing with technology as they join us. So we're going to start in about 3 minutes. In the meantime, I'd like to go over some housekeeping with the people who are here today. My name is Christina Zavrucha. I'm the community garden manager for Vines. And I'm going to be supporting Kyle with the workshop today. If you noticed when you entered today, you were muted automatically. However, you are able to unmute yourself. If you look at the bottom of your screen, maybe move your mouse to the bottom left-hand corner, there's a little microphone that says mute. You can click that to unmute, and then another cool trick that you might not know is that if you have your space bar button, you can just kind of hit that for a few seconds and speak and then let go in order to speak up. But we're going to ask everybody to please stay muted while Kyle is presenting. But there are going to be opportunities for you to ask questions. Kyle is going to open up for a Q&A. You're also welcome to enter questions. If you look, there's a stop video, start video right next to that microphone on the bottom left-hand corner. If there's anything distracting happening on your end, you can turn off your video. And then if you go 2 steps down, there's a place that says chat. You are welcome to type in your chat questions in the chat window at any point, and we'll get to those questions one by one, either with Kyle or by somebody responding to you in the chat box. And if you want to change your name, you are able to do that from the settings section of your profile, but that's not necessary. Maybe when you're speaking, just introduce yourself, say your name. Are there any questions from any of the participants about housekeeping on Zoom?
Right. Just got finished seeing patients and all that. And
I thought the co-host was.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and mute you guys.
hold on.
Can I edit right here?
Okay, and we're going to start off with a little poll. So you're going to see a poll come up in your window, and we're going to ask you to respond to these questions. This is going to help us better respond to your needs during the workshop. Are you ready for the poll? Awesome. Here we go.
Poll didn't work for me.
You know what? If the poll didn't work for you, I'm going to go ahead and send you. I am going to send you a different way to answer the questions. Thank you for letting me know. So Sierra and Alice, I just sent you a link to the Google Drive version of the poll, which you're welcome to respond to.
Christina, can I ask a question? Hi, I'm on.
Hi, Denny. Hi.
Hello. So did the whole group of all the gardeners get this invitation?
This was sent on the Vines listserv and the
So all
Facebook.
my gardeners should have gotten a copy.
Mhm. But I think we'll be offering many more workshops in the future, so please let them know how great
Yeah.
this one was.
Yeah, it makes it easy. Yeah.
So it looks like 80% of our participants voted. We're going to put the results up on the screen so we can all learn a little bit about each other. So it looks like 44% of us have no seed starting experience whatsoever. That's really good to know. And then the other 60% have anywhere between 1 and 5 or more seasons of seed starting experience. It looks like 8 out of 30 are going to be growing their seedlings under a south-facing window. And then 20% and 24% for grow lights, direct sow, or other. 40% of our participants are going to be planting at home in a raised bed. 28% are from community gardens like Denny. And it looks like seed starting budget. And again, this was an optional question, but it looks like most people are looking for a budget to spend between $20 and $40 for seed starting. Okay.
Cool.
Guys, thank you so much for participating in the poll. And again, throughout, just put your questions in the chat window and Kyle will invite you to ask questions as needed. Let's give Kyle a round of applause. Welcome, Kyle.
Yay.
Yeah. Hello, everybody.
Hello, Kyle.
Hey, so my name, as Christina said, is Kyle, and I manage the Binghamton Urban Farm here with Vines. So yeah, I'm going to go through a couple of different things about seed starting, some of the basics, and then some more advanced stuff too, different things that you might need if you don't have already. And then there's also the worksheet. So if you want to look along with the worksheet that Christina shared, I'll kind of be following that. Yeah, to start off, I guess, why are you starting your own seeds? There's a lot of different reasons to. Say there's different varieties that you might be interested in growing. So at places like Lowe's or Agway, where you might buy your seedlings, maybe they have like 5 or 10 different tomatoes, when in reality there's hundreds of different varieties of tomatoes. So starting your own can, you can get a lot of different cool plants that you might not otherwise be able to find anywhere. It's also can be more economical in terms of like purchasing transplants, a packet of seeds. If you already have once you already have the other materials, they're mostly reusable. The containers, the lights, all that. And so packet of seeds is a lot cheaper than buying transplants. And then also, you can end up with healthier plants ready to go out into the soil. Particularly, you can time it exactly right for your schedule. Whereas, sometimes I've seen at Agway later in the season, their plants are, when they're getting older, they're kind of lower quality. So you want, when you start your own and grow your own, you can have it streamlined so that it's, the plant is, at its perfect time, hopefully, to go out into the soil, and it's not too big or it's not too small or whatever. Yeah, so that's a couple of reasons why people might want to be starting their own seeds. So other things we'll have. So you need some resources, right? Some supplies. So I'll go through a couple of the basic ones, and then I'll do a little demonstration, talk about how we do it here at the farm. So the first thing you're going to need are seeds, obviously. So there's on that worksheet at the bottom, there's a list of a bunch of different seed companies that you can order from online, or there's a lot of different places locally. Most hardware stores, Agway, they all carry seeds. I have a couple of different packets here with me. We order a lot of our seeds at the farm here from Johnny's. They're pretty high quality, a little bit more expensive sometimes, but they do a lot of testing on their seed lots to make sure they have really good germination rates and all that. There's also obviously Burpee is another company, and we get a lot of seeds donated to Vines as well, and Burpee seeds tend to have a big supply of those. And so the other thing you're going to need is some soil, and not all soil is created equal, that's for sure. We use, let me grab some. So I've got a bag of soil over here that we get from a company up in Ithaca called Green Tree. And the most important thing for seed starting soil is you want to make sure that it's a seed starting soil. You don't necessarily want a potting mix or something like that. A lot of times potting mixes or garden soil, you'll see you can get bags of it at the hardware store. Those are usually heavier, as well as they have a bit more nutrients, or like long lasting nutrient, little slow release fertilizers in them. Whereas the seed starting mix usually tends to have lower fertility because the plant isn't going to be growing in it for too long. And it also has the little white things in here is perlite, and that helps it be fluffy and lighter. And that's one of the more important things for seed starting is you want soil that's going to be kind of light, but able to still hold moisture. And so there's a couple different aspects in most soils. In terms of seed starting mix, you've got the perlite, which is actually a puffed volcanic rock. So it's kind of a cool light material that adds, like I said, air to the mix. It makes it lighter, makes oxygen easier to get into the soil and then to the plant roots. There's also usually in seed starting mixes some sort of water or moisture retaining aspect. And so our mix here that we get from Ithaca has coconut coir, but peat moss is usually the most common. You can mix your own seed starting mix at home just with some peat moss and some perlite, but it's easier to buy a pre-mixed bag. And it's not too expensive. You don't need a whole lot. If you're starting seeds, one bag would be enough for quite a lot usually. So that's some soil basics. And then one of the other things that you're going to need is some sort of container. So here at the Urban Farm, we've got these flats that we start everything in. You can see I've got some pepper seedlings in a flat here, and it's got holes on the bottom. I don't know if you can see, so the water can drain through. That's one of the more important things with any container you have. You don't want your seeds sitting in water at the bottom. Another thing that I like to use at home personally, and I saw a lot of you, if you're starting in a south-facing window, maybe space is a bit of an issue. And so takeout containers, any sort of plastic takeout container, these will work great. And I've used them at home myself. You just poke some holes in the bottom with a knife or something, and you can start seeds right in this, kind of packed closer together. And then you can transplant them into something a little bit further apart once they get bigger. If you've got more space or you have the space and you don't think you need to keep them close together, you can plant directly into these 6-packs, or what they call. This is what most seedlings come in when you buy transplants from the store. So I've got a couple of those. I'll do a little demonstration. Let me just check here real quick. Okay, so do we have any questions so far? I see there's a couple of things happening in the chat. Are there any things about the seeds, soil, or containers that anybody wants to ask a question about maybe?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I only have potting soil, so would you recommend, can I use that if that's all I have, or should I go buy the specific soil for seeds?
Yeah, I mean, a potting soil would work. It's just that, usually potting soil doesn't have as much perlite, and it's not as light, and it's got more fertilizer in it. So it probably would work, but it tends to be a little bit heavier and the seedlings might not be as vigorous when you first start, but it would definitely work if that's all you got. And, you know, yeah, I'd say give it
Okay.
a try.
Okay.
Thank you.
I've got one of those kits with the pallets. I've been trying that for the first time. What do you think of those? It's that little pallet, you water it and it hooks up into the coir and the blah, blah, and stuck the seeds in that.
Yeah, I've heard of a lot of people having success with that. That's a good thing that you brought up there. Those are definitely kind of yeah, they're simple. They come in little the little pellets that expand, right, when you add
Yeah.
water. Yep.
Do you know where I can get more of them though? Because I tried home the other day and I couldn't find them out there.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I would bet that Agway would have those. Agway has quite a supply of different soils and seed starting stuff.
Okay, cool.
Yep. The one thing about the little pellets there, or there's also like fabric pots, like little small. They're called cow pots. Sometimes they're made out of a biodegradable material, and you can fill those up with soil and plant into them. The one thing I found with those is they tend to dry out quicker, and so you really want to stay on top of the moisture level with them. But yeah, that's a good question.
How about the light bulbs? Can you use any kind of light bulb for grow light, or is it specific, or is it fluorescent? Can you use fluorescent lights?
Yeah, so I was going to talk a little bit about lights in a minute here. But so if you want to just hold on to that question, hopefully I'll answer it in a couple minutes.
Okay.
So I see there's a question from Lynn in the chat. Making your own starter soil mix, you add the perlite and peat to regular potting soil. This is what I have done. Yeah, so that's definitely an option if you've got that potting mix. You might not need the peat mix in with it, but if you have a potting mix that is a heavier mix, you can definitely add a little bit of perlite into it to lighten it up to get a little bit better results from that. Cool. Okay, so yeah, so I guess I'll start about how to start seeds then a little bit. So like I said, at the farm, we start all of our seeds in open flats like this. And so here I've got shishito peppers, which is actually this packet right here. And so I start all of our stuff in big open flats like this because you can fit, you know, a couple hundred plants in a small amount of space. And like I was saying with a container like this, you could fit 30, you know, small seedlings in here, and they might be able to grow for a good 2 to 3 weeks. I believe these shishitos I seeded 2.5 weeks ago, and they're just about ready to transplant now, which I'll get to in a minute. But so if I was going to start seeds in this, what I would do is get my soil mix. Pop it in, and there's a lot of different ways to do it, you know. And if you follow the packet that usually has all of the instructions that you need, some of them have different different planting depths. A rule of thumb, though, is you usually plant, look at the size of the seed and plant it twice the depth or twice the diameter of the seed. That's how deep you plant it. So if your tomato seed is, you know, just this big, you plant twice that deep. Some plants, like lettuce, need a little bit of light to germinate, and it'll usually say that on the back of the packet. The Johnny's packet tends to have quite a bit of information on the back. So actually on the front, you've got your variety name and your type of vegetable. And this one this is a hybrid Chinese cabbage that I've got here. And so a hybrid is a mix, so you wouldn't be able to save seeds from this because the offspring from the seed wouldn't be true to the parent. Whereas the shishito pepper is an heirloom. You see the heirloom. So that's a big difference in the quality of your seeds as well. An heirloom seed, the only difference is you can save seed from this plant and that fruit, and you can plant it next year and it'll give you the same exact fruit, same exact type plant. Whereas a hybrid won't be able to do that. But the benefit of planting hybrids is you get this thing called hybrid vigor, which leads to higher fruit production, increased growth. So as a farmer here, you know, I'm really growing for production, and so I choose a lot of hybrids usually. They also have sometimes better disease resistance, but yeah, so they also have the days to maturity. So I don't know if you can see that at all, but the minuet here is 48 days. So that's the other thing that you want to think about when you're starting seeds, is when the last frost date is. And so here in Binghamton, the last frost date is anywhere from the beginning of May to the second week of May. So that's the key date for most gardeners, what they need to know. And so things like tomatoes and peppers are not frost hardy at all. So you want to plan those seeds to go out right after the second week of May, or right about the second week of May. But it's going to change every year, so keeping an eye on the weather. So these peppers, you know, like I said, were started about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And right about now, actually, is the time to plant my Chinese cabbage. So so I've got my tray prepared, right? I've got soil in it. And usually what I do is I'll make little furrows with my fingers, just an inch or so apart, pretty close. A couple of little furrows. And then you can just go through and pop some seeds right on top there in your furrows. A lot of seeds are pretty small, so you know, you got to be careful. The cabbage seeds are decent size. You can pick up one at a time, and a lot of like this, I'll plant, you know, 1/4 inch apart from each other, pretty close together. As you can see, the peppers are growing real close together, and then you just come through and cover up the furrow. So I would just plant a little furrow and then cover it up. Alternatively, you can also plant directly into 6-pack like this. So just kind of fill it up. You can lightly pack it down. You don't want to compress it too much, but it will settle as you water it. So you fill up your 6-pack, and then you can make a little hole based on the planting depth that your seed requires. The cabbage doesn't need to be planted too deep, so just a little hole in each one. And a lot of times when people plant directly into the 6-packs, you want to put 2 or 3 seeds in each hole to ensure that you at least get one that germinates, and then you thin them out later. So, but when you start in an open container like this, you don't have to, you know, worry about like having a bunch. So you're going to have a bunch that germinate, and you're going to transplant them out anyways. And so, but if you start directly in the 6 cells like this, you definitely want to put more than 1 seed in each. Otherwise, you'll have empty cells probably. Even the cabbage here, I mean, the cabbage is 99% germination. Some seeds, though, go as low as like 70 germination percent. So you're always going to have seeds, you know, that don't sprout. And so once you've got it seeded, the next thing to do is to water it, right? So there's a couple of handy things that help with watering. The biggest thing is that you don't want to be too vigorous with your watering, because if you water this bare soil, you like put it under a faucet or something, it's just gonna move the soil around a lot, and it's gonna either bury the seed too much or expose it, or it's gonna wash the soil away. And so you want to be really gentle when you're watering seed that you've just started. And so there's a lot of tricks for that. What I've got here is a flat that's the same size as my pepper flat here, except it doesn't have holes in the bottom. So it's solid in the bottom. So you can fill this right up with water, and then you just put your 6-packs right in that. And then they slowly absorb from the bottom. They pull water up. So that's a handy way. And, you know, they sell these at most places where you get seed starting supplies. You can get these closed flats that you can fill up and water from below. It's a really efficient way, definitely, to water. Other things, you can use, you know, any sort of plastic container that doesn't let water through, essentially. As long as there's holes in the bottom of your container that you started the seeds in, it'll draw moisture up. You can also use a spray bottle. Spray bottles are pretty handy for watering seedlings. So you can just, spray pretty close to the soil and moisten the top of it, and then let it sink in for a couple of seconds, and then continue to moisten it. And the spray bottle works pretty well if you don't have, a bottom watering ability. You could even use like a boot rack, or not a boot rack, but like a mud boot holder. Anything that can hold just a little bit of water and can allow the soil to pull that water up. Those are kind of some of the basics of watering. So you've got your seeds planted, and you've got them watered. The next thing, as somebody was mentioning, is lighting. So in my experience, south-facing windows, they will work for a short amount of time, but oftentimes they don't get as much light as you would think. And so what happens is seedlings can get leggy, it's called. And so let me pull out a pepper plant. So this is a little baby pepper plant. And what happens when a seedling gets leggy is it doesn't have enough light during the day to fully grow. And so you can see where the soil level is on this and the stem. So when it gets leggy, the stem is like reaching and reaching and reaching, and there's not enough light. So it gets really long, it gets thin, it's spindly. And the cotyledons, which are the first leaves that appear, those will be kind of small. So those are some indications that your plants aren't getting enough light. So, you can try starting in a south-facing window, but if you start to see symptoms of that legginess, then that's a sign that you need to increase the light somehow. What we used to do before we started all of the seeds in the hoop house here is we used the Chow Garage. We partner with Chow, the local food pantry, and they let us use a bay in their garage where we have a bunch of shop lights set up, which I have one here. So this is just a regular incandescent or fluorescent, shop light. I think they're T12 bulbs. That just has to do with the efficiency. The thing that matters is the highest amount of lumen output that you can get. So, nice and bright. But with these fluorescent bulbs, you can grow them. You can hook them up with chains, which is what we have here, a little chain and a little hook. And so you put the light actually quite close to the plant, pretty much as close to the seedlings as you can get without touching them. So like if I had this set up right now, it would be, like an inch above the pepper seedlings. And then you've got the chain, so you can slowly raise it as the plants grow up.
Kyle, am I interrupting? I don't know if I am supposed to, on a chat, speak or type in, or just interrupt and ask a question. How do I handle that?
Denny?
How do I handle a question? Do I have to type it in?
Yeah, actually, well, why don't I open it up to some questions for what I just went over there a little bit? And yeah, what's your question that you got?
Okay, I have two questions. One, shouldn't the grow light be of a certain light spectrum, like a 15K or 40K? Aren't they rated that way? And secondly, once they're really leggy, which mine are 2 inches, is it just worth it to abandon it and start over and give them more light?
Yeah, good questions. So the spectrum, it matters a little bit, but not really. Most lights that you'll find in the hardware store are, I think they're going to be fine. Like I said, the amount of lumens that they put out is most important. If you have the ones that, mimic sunlight, I would bet that would be, more ideal in terms of the wavelength that it puts out. There are, the next step up from like the shop light style is like they make specific grow lights, which are either high pressure sodium or metal halide. And those emit different spectrums a little bit, but they both work quite well. Which you can find those as like outdoor security lights, or like if you think of a light in a parking lot, those are usually high pressure sodium or metal halide. They produce a lot of heat, and you keep them a lot further away from the plant, but they work a lot a lot better, put out a lot more light. A lot of the new LED lights as well are pretty expensive. Like you can get the LED tube lighting. It's pretty expensive, but in terms of electricity usage, it'll pay off in a couple years, I imagine. And then the second part of the question, if it's already leggy, there is a trick to get rid of the legginess when you're transplanting. And so, well, I'll talk about transplanting in just a second, Denny. So hold that question in mind.
Okay.
Let's see, we've got some other stuff in the chat here, maybe. Let's see, what type of bulb? Oh, looks like Christina did that one. I already planted seedlings, but I think I planted too deep. And now I forgot which containers held which plant. Oh, yeah. Not sure if I can replant them because the seeds are tiny. So a lot of the times, if it's really deep, they might not come up. If the seeds are real small, if it's over an inch deep and you've got like a little baby lettuce seedling, it might not come up. That's the other thing that I guess I forgot to mention is label. Always label your seeds. I've got a bunch of old leftover labels from transplants that have been donated to us that I repurpose with the variety name and then the date. I just go by week, so week 13 of the year. But yeah, always make sure you try and label. And if it was planted too deep, or you're afraid that it might be planted too deep, if you have more seeds, definitely give it another try. Better to have something. The best time to plant a seed was yesterday, kind of like a tree. Any other questions so far?
Right, I have another one. I got a packet from Christina for, basically a mix of seeds and vegetable and flower seeds. But I was just going to send an email saying that they're going to be in the tool bin. But I would think for new gardeners, isn't it a little bit late to start anything from seeds at this time of year? People don't really know. I mean, just generally, isn't it getting late for seed starting?
Yeah, so it depends on what you're trying to grow. If you're trying, things like kale and collards and a lot of greens like that, you can start up until the middle of the summer and you'll still get some.
How about tomatoes? Is it a little late for tomatoes?
I mean, if you look at the days to maturity for tomatoes, so like I've got some cherry tomatoes here, it's 70 days to harvest.
Oh, so, yeah.
And so, if you get them started and 70 days ends up being, in the middle of August, you're still going to get some tomatoes for a couple of weeks. The earlier you start them, obviously, and the closer you get them out to, the last frost date or just after, obviously the more harvest you'll be able to get out of them. But so for tomatoes, ideally it's a little too late, but it's not really too late. 70 days to harvest. A lot of slicing tomatoes, anywhere from 65 to 80 days to harvest, I think. So yeah, so it's not really too late. You'll just have a little bit of a reduced harvest and yield at the end of the year. But
how would that work with things like peppers and broccoli and things that I missed the window on for starting inside?
Yeah, the peppers would be similar to tomatoes. Peppers tend to be a little bit longer season though, so it might be a little late. Let me see my shishito peppers. The shishitos are 70 days to harvest, but I think some of the like bell peppers are more like 90 days or such. So, you're right on the edge of when it would be good. And realistically, if you don't have like a whole light setup and all you have is the south-facing window, you don't want the plants to be inside for too long. You want to be able to get them out as soon as they start to either outgrow their pot or start to get kind of leggy. You want to increase the sunlight.
Well, if they're under a light, would it make a difference if the light was on all the time? Or would that be a bad thing to do?
Oh yeah. So if they're under a light,
Yeah.
That goes back and forth. I've heard a lot of different people talking about that. You can leave it on for 24 hours. I think the only thing is your light might get kind of hot, and it might reduce the lifetime of the light, perhaps. When I was growing seedlings for the farm in the Chow Garage, I would have a timer set up, and I believe it was like 20 hours on and 4 hours off, or maybe 18 and 6, something like that. But the longer the amount of daylight, I think is the better for starting them. Yeah,
Okay.
good question.
Thanks.
But I had to follow up. You talked about if they do get leggy, there's a little trick, but I don't think you really addressed that.
Yeah, so the next thing I was going to talk about was transplanting. And so let's see, it looks like there's a question in the chat here first. Oh, Sharon was making somebody uses a chopstick. Yep. Okay. So yeah, I'll talk about transplanting a little bit. And so if you've started your seeds, in the six cells already, and they do get kind of leggy, what you can do is you can transplant them and bury them. And so I've got another 6 cell here that doesn't have anything in it, and the soil's nice and moist. And so these peppers actually are about ready to transplant. They've been in here for 2.5 weeks, and I'm going to put them in a 38 cell, but you can put them in, anything that's bigger than what they're currently in. So, but the same would be true as if you had, something that was too leggy. What you can do is you get your moistened soil in whatever 6-pack, and you pre-drill a hole. So you just poke a hole with a pencil or a piece of wood all the way through. And then what you do is you take your seedling, and this might be a little tough. You kind of line it up over the hole, and you just push the roots down in, and you see how it buried so it's buried up to the cotyledons, the first leaves there. So all that legginess, all that stem is now buried in the soil. So transplanting like that is a way to essentially get rid of the legginess and to make stronger, more stout plants. And then at this point, if they were getting leggy, you need a little bit more light, and so you can address the light issue after you've transplanted. So that's what I would suggest, Denny, is transplanting like that, burying.
Oh, should be able to save them. That's good news.
Yeah, yep. They can be a little bit, one of the other things that I didn't mention is if they are getting leggy, they can be a little weak. And so another important factor when you're starting seedlings and growing them is they need some sort of air movement to strengthen the stem. And so if they're, don't have any resistance, any force against them, any stress, they're not going to grow strong. And so having a fan going nearby, or, if you don't have a fan, just every day when you're watering them, just brushing them lightly, moving them around a little bit, that'll strengthen the stems up and make transplanting a little bit easier and give you just a healthier plant in general. Looks like we have another
That's a good tip. Thanks.
Yeah. I started some veggies from cooking scraps. Can I bother you with a question on those? Yeah, what's the question?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I didn't start them from seeds, but I maybe used a half onion, and then I'd put it in a bowl of water and it'd start to sprout, and they're getting pretty tall. I'm not sure if they're what you considered leggy or if they're just ready to be dropped in some dirt.
Yeah. Cool. I've never heard of anybody starting onions like that before. My grandma used to start potatoes, though, from potatoes that she'd just buy at the store. And
I've done it with onions, celery, carrots, and lettuce so far.
Cool. Yeah, so the onion is having a tall shoot coming up, you're saying?
Yes.
So that's kind of how onions grow. Actually, let me grab a couple of our onion seedlings here.
Thank you.
So these are some red onions that I've actually trimmed. You can see they're kind of cut short. And I started all these directly in, it's a 128, so there's 128 cells in each tray here.
Wow.
And I'm pulling out. So the onion plant kind of grows more like grass than anything else. And so it might, have the appearance of being leggy, but baby onion seeds, they'll get tall. And these were probably about twice as tall as this. Right now it's about 4.5 inches tall. So they were close to 9-10 inches tall. And I trimmed them down just so that they're easier to manage. But essentially onion kind of grows like grass. So
Okay.
you can trim the top.
Mhm.
As long as you don't trim down too low where the you see the leaves are splitting there at the
Right.
stem, that's where new leaves will come out of that. So as long as you don't trim below that point, you can trim them down before you put them outside. Yep.
Cool.
Kyle, one more on seeds. What type of seeds do you recommend soaking in paper towel or moist cloth prior to planting the seed?
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people will soak pea seeds in particular, and perhaps beans, things in the legume family like that, or a lot of perennials. Some flowers, need to be in moist soil in the fridge or something for a couple of months, so they're stratified, it's called. I have never soaked any of my pea seeds when I've planted, and I've always had good luck. But I know some people, actually I planted some sweet peas, which are a flower with a real great scent. I planted some of those this year for the first time, and I noticed on the packet it said, soak for a couple of hours to pre-sprout them almost. But I didn't do that. I just went ahead and planted them, and they're coming up quite fine. So, it can quicken the germination perhaps, but it's usually not 100% necessary, I think.
Okay, thank
How
you.
about corn? Would that help to soak it, or you just put that in directly?
What's that?
Corn?
Corn. So that's a good question. Corn is kind of a weird crop because some people will direct seed it. Some people will transplant it. I have never soaked my corn seed, but usually, at least on the farm here, I get seed that's treated with an antifungal, an organic antifungal thing. And so if I soaked them, it would wash that off. And that just allows me to plant in cooler soil and earlier in the season. But I've never heard of anybody soaking corn seed. It could be something that might be worthwhile though. Like I said, just quicken that germination time. Yep. So another person had a question: leave water in the trays and don't let it go dry, and they just drink only what they need. So yeah, that's exactly what you can do with this tray here. It'll as the plants get really big, the roots might be below the water line eventually, and that can lead them to not producing as well, and the roots won't survive necessarily if they're fully submerged in water. And so what I would do is I would just keep an eye on it, and you can keep like a little 1/4 inch in the bottom. And if you notice it starting to dry out, just put a little bit more in the bottom, or spritz the top as well. But you don't want them fully submerged, in a lot of water constantly. So that's a good question. You want to keep an eye on them though, to make sure that they don't dry out is the main thing. Another question, a pop-up greenhouse. We're going to put it on the patio on the south side of the house. Yeah, that sounds like I've seen a lot of little greenhouse kits that you can get. The main thing you've got to look out for is if the sun comes out during the day, and it's a real warm day, it can easily get to like over 100 degrees in those greenhouses. The greenhouse here, a couple weekends ago, actually, I wasn't paying attention, and the sun was out, and I came in and it was like 127 degrees with like 99% humidity. It was just like way too hot. And so you really just got to be careful that it doesn't get too hot. That's the biggest issue with those. But otherwise, I think they're quite useful. If you do have a cold night, like we've got some cold nights coming up tonight actually is going to be close to a record low near the low 20s. And so I brought all of my seedlings in that were hardening off outside, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But if you got a cold night and you've got plants still out there, you can put like hot water bottles, like fill up a couple of 2 liters with hot water from the tap and put them in the greenhouse, and they'll radiate a little bit of warmth to keep the seedlings warm in the night. And then, you know, just keep an eye on when the sun comes out during the day to open it up and give it some air circulation. Yeah. Another question on the temperature. Southwest window, 61 to 64. Yeah, I think, you know, in the 60s is a good medium range temperature for most seedlings. Some things like peppers, you know, prefer 70s, but if you're growing a lot of different things, in the 60 to 70 range is definitely a fine temperature. When seeds are, when they're first germinating, another thing that I didn't mention that's on the resource page is a heat mat. And so in the early season, we have electric heat mats here at the farm, which is essentially a thin piece of plastic with metal wiring in it. It works like an electric blanket. So you lay that out, and then you put your seedling trays on top of that, and it provides warmth from the bottom. And you can set those to like 90 degrees, which is 80 to 90 is actually optimum for germination. But then as soon as they germinate, you got to take them away from that heat and grow them in anywhere from 60 to 70 usually. And so having a little extra heat before they sprout can help quicken germination. But yeah, 60 to 70 for growing temperature is pretty good for seedlings. Cool. How are we doing on time? Oh wow, it's 10 of already. So I guess I'll just talk a little bit about hardening off real quick, and then we'll do some more questions. So you've got your, oh wait, one more thing I was gonna say is on tomatoes, for instance. So these are tomatoes that I had been growing. I had them transplanted from an open flat into a 6-pack a couple weeks ago. And now, if it's still not, so they're still not ready to go out because we've got another couple of weeks of before it's frost free. And so up potting is another term for transplanting. And so you can see these are starting to crowd each other out a little bit. So you can, what I'm gonna do later, maybe tomorrow actually, is take all my tomatoes and peppers that are getting too big, take them out of their 6 cells. You can see the roots are pretty much fully encompassing the plug, and put them into a bigger pot like this one. This is a, I believe it's a 4-inch round. And so if you start your seeds early enough and you get them going, then you'll up pot them into something like this. And then they can live in this for another couple of weeks at least until they are able to go outside. So up potting. And then once it's in this and it's getting ready to go outside, so like I said, I had some seedlings outside that I brought in. Our onions, for instance, are going to be planted probably next week. I've been hardening them off all week. And so hardening them off means that you're acclimating them to the outside temperature and weather conditions. And so if they're growing inside or they're growing in a greenhouse, you know, they're high humidity, high temperature, pretty ideal conditions. When they go outside, if you just put them right into the field, disturb the roots, that's a lot of stress for a plant. And so you want to get them used to those outdoor temperatures, expose them slowly over the course of like a week or two. And so what you can do is, you know, you put them out in the day when it's nice and warm, maybe a little bit cooler is fine, as long as it's not freezing. And then, you know, they'll spend the day outside, experience different weather, a little bit cooler than probably inside. And then you can bring them back in at night or cover them up with something. A lot of people have, you can have like a cold frame, it's called, which is essentially a miniature greenhouse that you can open during the day fully and then close it at night. And so eventually you build up, you know, putting them out, bringing them in, putting them out, and then you can leave them outside with minimal cover through the evening, and then they're ready to transplant into the field. The other thing, so you're exposing them to temperatures, lower temperatures slowly, you're also minimizing the water that you give them. And so you're slightly stressing them out, essentially. And so you're getting the plants used to more and more stress. And that makes them hardier, and that makes them hardened. So they're hardened off. That's where the term comes from. Yeah, so like I said, our onions, you know, I've been hardening off for this past week. And if it wasn't going to be so cold today and tomorrow, I would have probably planted them today. But instead, they're going to have to wait a couple more days till the weather gets nice. But yeah, do we have any other questions? What didn't I touch on that? Let's
So
see.
you just, for those peppers that you have, you just pull them out? You just pull them right out and plant them? I mean, you don't like, I mean, treat them gentle or anything? You just yank them right out of the soil?
Yeah, good question. So, you know, you want to be delicate with them, obviously. You want the soil to be moist when you're working with them. That, you know, protects the roots a little bit more. But usually I just kind of dig right in with my hands, pull out a clump, and, you know, try and get the roots. You don't want to pull them from the top because that can rip the roots. So you want to dig them out from below if you can. And like here, I've got 2 little baby pepper plants, you know, growing together. So you can be pretty rough with them. Oop, that guy just fell. Kind of, you know, brush off the soil as long as you're not breaking the main roots. And even if you do, sometimes they'll still do all right. Usually, plants are pretty hardy. And then, you know, like I said, pushing them into the soil. You want to be kind of delicate. You don't break the roots like that, but they just kind of press right in. And I do a lot of transplanting this time of year, and I've, you know, broken some roots, and they still end up doing just fine. But burying them like that, so just the cotyledons are showing. You can be kind of rough with them. They're not terribly delicate. Good question though. Let's see, we got another question here. Any tips for keeping squirrels away? That's a good question. Yeah. I guess, you know, fencing, unfortunately, it can be expensive and a bit obnoxious. Like a chicken wire fence, though, you know, something that the squirrels can't get through. You can, you could even make like hoops and, you know, wrap a raised bed with chicken wire. I've seen people do that to keep pests out. At the Chow Farm, another location that we manage, we have a lot of woodchucks and stuff, and you have to bury your fence along the outside of the garden and then bury it out as well to keep a lot of pests that burrow under fences away, like rabbits and woodchucks. So pests can be quite an issue. I don't think squirrels, I've never had squirrels messing with plants necessarily. Squirrels more like to come into the greenhouse and like dig up transplants and replace them with, you know, chestnuts or acorns or something more than anything. I've never seen them eating. Chipmunks and mice, though, I have seen eating little pea seedlings. They'll come through and just take a little snip right at the base. Or with corn, somebody was talking about corn earlier. Birds will like to come and eat that little corn kernel that's stuck at the base of the root, which can be really obnoxious. The other thing that you can use is stuff called floating row cover, which is essentially a thin piece of fabric. Most growers use row cover during the spring to protect from pests. And so you can get little wire hoops around your bed and around your plants and put row cover over it. And that can be enough, hopefully, to deter things. You know, if something was really determined, they could rip through it probably or get underneath it. But those are some other options, some light fabric or some chicken wire. Yeah. Cool. Any other questions?
I have one question about if you're using a high pressure sodium light to start seedlings, is it okay to keep that really close to the soil just until they get started, and at that point should it be moved away?
Yeah, I would be nervous just because it can be a bit of a fire hazard. I know those can get pretty hot. I have one at home that I use. I have set up in my greenhouse. for starting in the early, and it gives off a good deal of warmth. So, you know, you could have it as close as a foot, I would say, until they germinate. But as soon as they germinate, you want to raise it up a bit more so that it doesn't burn the plants. But yeah, good question.
If I can interject, since I am used to being a little bit of the lighting business, high pressure sodium are real energy hogs. They're probably the most inefficient source there is. So if you have a choice, I would not suggest you buy one.
Yeah.
I have fluorescent and a high pressure sodium, and I just thought I could maximize how much I could start at one time.
Yeah.
Like, it's very hot compared to the fluorescent.
And that's the inefficiency, right? It's producing light almost. Yeah.
Yes.
But, and the cost of LEDs, you know, if you are gonna, you know, be starting seeds for the rest of your life, gardening for a long time, it might be worth investing in a small LED light set.
Yeah.
And those are a lot more energy efficient and give out light similar to the high pressure sodium, a lot more than the fluorescent tubes will.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I don't have any, Kyle.
Okay. It looks like the only other thing on that worksheet I didn't really talk about is starting things at different times of the year versus direct sowing as well. And so there's a couple of guidelines there. You know, we're in April here, and actually I'll be starting some of our cucumbers and squashes fairly shortly. I've got a lot of our herbs already started. The basil is going to be ready to be transplanted shortly. And I also just direct seeded our first carrots and peas outside. And so direct seeding, you know, is putting it directly into the garden where it's going to be. So a lot of root crops like carrots, turnips, beets don't like to be disturbed. Obviously, like I was doing with that pepper plant, if that was a baby carrot, I'm going to have a deformed carrot if I transplant it like that, or it's just going to break and it's not going to survive. So they're a lot more delicate. And the rule of thumb is if it's a root crop, you don't want to transplant it. You want to direct seed it. Pretty much anything else, though, you can start inside and get a bit of a head start. And you know, when you have a transplant, it allows you to you know, keep the weeds at bay a little bit easier. You know, and it gives it a jump start against the weeds. So so if you have the means, transplanting is more ideal than direct seeding. But.
Kyle, when you mentioned deformed carrots, that's all I ever grow. What does it take to grow a straight, kind of normal looking carrot? I mean, they're 3 and 4 jets out, all kinds of, they're never straight.
Yeah, I'm hoping to have good luck with our carrots this year because I planted them in a new field where there's we laid down a whole bunch of screen topsoil, you know, so there's no rocks in it. So a lot of times the rocks, you know, carrots will hit a rock or they'll hit some sort of hard particle in the soil.
And that's what causes it, yeah.
A wood chip would do that probably. And that's what causes them to deform. Or if your soil's really compact and they have a tough time getting through, they'll like, you know, curve to the side.
They usually try to loosen it up, but probably not enough. Well,
Yeah.
We'll see this year.
Let's see. Another question. Jabril from Facebook. If you use a grow mat with heat, is there a risk with how hot it can get? So yeah, like I was saying, as soon as you know, the grow mat will greatly accelerate the pace at which your seeds germinate. You don't, if you look at, well, actually, so the other thing is seed catalogs. Oftentimes there's a lot of information. I don't have my Johnny's catalog here, but there's essentially a curve, right, of like peak germination versus time. And so most seeds want to germinate in between 80 and like 95 degrees. That's where you'll get germination very quickly. Anything over that and the germination goes down. And then as soon as it pops, you want to take them off of the bottom heat and you want it a little bit cooler, because if you leave them on that bottom heat, they'll grow a little bit too quickly and they'll actually get leggy just from excess heat. It could also burn the roots and yeah, just cause a little bit of a stressed out plant. Yep. Let's see, another question. best place to buy garden soil for my new raised garden bed. Place that would deliver. I know Agway, sells bulk. I don't know if they deliver. They might. Another place that I've used before is Robinson Hill Nursery in Binghamton. They're outside of Binghamton, but Robinson Hill Nursery. They deliver topsoil and compost, or a blend of both, I believe. I couldn't tell you the cost. Usually, maybe like $50 for delivery itself, and then the soil on top of that. But there are places that will deliver. Agway might. You could check though. Another question: how do you transplant lettuce? How large should it be? So a lot of times, like I was ready to transplant the peppers here, they are just starting to show their first set of true leaves. And so, like I was saying, you've got the cotyledons are the first leaves, and then the true leaves are just starting to come out in between there. So usually when I transplant from this into any sort of plug tray, it's right about when the first set of true leaves starts to appear. And then when you transplant out into the field, it's more about the weather, the timing, and also how overgrown it is in your pot. And so if the timing was right and the weather was good, these would be ready to go out right now. They're starting to crowd each other out. The leaves are touching plants next to each other. And then as well, like I was showing with the roots have fully encompassed the root ball, and it holds together really well, without me doing anything. So that's another good sign, is when your roots are fully enveloped in the root ball. Those are kind of some of the tricks for when things are ready to transplant out. Let's see, another question on grow lights, 24 hours. Yeah, so I mean, anywhere from 18 to 24 hours, you can have the lights on. They don't need a whole lot of darkness. For things to, what the light and the dark cycle does is it'll force things to flower, or the onions, for instance, when the days start to get shorter is when they start to bulb and create the bulb. And so they're growing vegetatively until that certain ratio of daylight and night happens, where it starts to get shorter days, longer nights. That'll trigger the bulbs to increase in size. But for most seed starting, you can leave them on pretty much all day, or just turn them off for a couple hours in the evening. Let's see. Oh, question about damping off. That's a good question. So damping off is a disease, for those that don't know, caused by a lot of different either bacteria or fungi. And usually what happens is you'll get right at the base of the stem, it'll turn brown and it'll shrivel right above the soil level, and the plant will just fall over and slowly die. But you'll see it usually right above the soil. That's a sign that it's damping off. And that is oftentimes caused by excess moisture. And so if your plants, like we were saying earlier, if they're sitting in water, and it's also, maybe it's a little hot, that can cause damping off. It can allow the proliferation of a fungus. Also having, if that does happen, what you want to do is you want to empty the trays, and you want to wash them, make sure they're clean, and with a little bit of Clorox or something, just to sterilize them, and then start again with a seed starting mix. Oftentimes these seed starting mixes are sterile as well. So so that's important, is you want to make sure you have either a sterile mix or one that just has sometimes they add mycorrhizae, it's called, which is a beneficial fungi. And so, but yeah, damping off is a very common problem. I've had it happen a couple of times in the greenhouse here, and it's just an excess heat and moisture that allows some sort of pest to grow. Yep. Another question: seeds that will germinate after best use date. Yeah, so that's a good question, which I think I didn't cover, but it was on the sheet a little bit. So most seeds will keep pretty well for at least a year. Some things, though, only last one season, like spinach seed. If you try and save, like say you don't plant all your spinach seed, you try and save it for the next year, the germination rate will go down quite sharply. Things like tomatoes, though, and peppers, you can store those seeds if they're in a cool and dry location. You could store them for a couple of years, probably 3 years before they really start to lose a lot of germination. And if you're worried that your seeds don't have good germination rate, start them in an open tray like this, and then you'll get the seeds only that germinate, and you can transplant them into the plugs after that. And so that way you have 100% in your plugs. That's the most important thing. But that's a good question. And you can look up online. There's plenty of different guides for how long seeds last in storage. Actually, at the farm here, I've got all my seeds. Now that I'm in the middle of, I'm seeding, almost every week, I've got a cooler over in the corner there. I don't know if you can see the cooler. But so, it gets to 80 and 90 degrees in here, but I've got all my seeds in that cooler, and they stay pretty cool in there and last for quite a while. And then as soon as I'm done with the seeding season here, I'll move that into the chow garage and store it in, indoors out of direct light in a nice cool spot. So proper storage of seed, though, will make it last longer. Let's see, is one of those trays an entire packet of seeds? Yeah, so the shishitos here, it's more about how much you wanna grow. Oftentimes, though, if you're, you've got one packet and you don't necessarily want to save it for the next year, I don't know how many seeds come in a packet on average. These tomatoes, it says 30 milligrams. So it's probably, there's probably, like a dozen or two seeds. Looks like, yeah, 20 to 30 seeds in there. And so if you wanted to save them, be a little bit more frugal, you could save them for the next year, or you could just sprinkle the whole packet and then take the healthiest looking plants out that you think you would be able to use in the garden. I'm more, in this pepper tray, I'm thinking about my production. I want 2 full beds of shishitos. That's like 75 plants per bed. So I need at least 145, 150 seeds, seedlings. And so I'll usually overplant by 20 to 30% as a farmer. That's what I usually plan for. You're going to have some that aren't perfect, some that don't germinate, and then you're also going to have some out in the field that don't produce as well. So there's a lot of factors, but I usually personally overplant by about 20% is pretty safe, and then you'll be sure to have some good seeds or good seedlings. Let's see, we got somebody from Australia. When do you plant corn over there? That's a good question. So corn, I usually plant, if you want to get real scientific about it, it's about the soil temperature. And so, for instance, potatoes, I'm getting ready to plant potatoes quite soon here and probably tomorrow. And those you want to plant when the soil's about 50 degrees. There's also other things like plant potatoes when the dandelions first start to open. For corn, you want it to be definitely up over 60 degrees, the soil. So usually around here, it's like 2 to 3 weeks after the last frost date. The soil is sufficiently warm. If you plant it a little bit earlier, especially here, we can have, last spring was quite wet. And so if it's a wet and cool spring, it's going to take a lot longer for the seed to germinate, if it does, but it's also much more susceptible to fungus and to rotting in the soil as compared to, germinating real quick and sprouting up and being a nice healthy plant in the warmer weather. I was also mentioning corn. The corn I buy has a treatment on it, and that allows me to plant a little bit earlier to get a jump start on the season. Some people, might not necessarily want that. The treatment, you got to be careful, if it is a fungicide or something, can be, harmful if you were to ingest that, heaven forbid, in any manner. But so usually by the 3rd to 4th week of May is when I plant corn here. But it depends on the weather. So, yep. Cool. Any other questions? How have I done?
Excellent.
Very informative. I get a lot of information out of it, Kyle. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That was very good. Mhm.
And Christina, thank you for hosting this. It went well, I think. Things are sharp and clear, and
Cool. Yeah.
the
Well,
visual, the audio was great. You did a wonderful job.
Good.
I think most of the gratitude goes to Kyle and to Amelia for encouraging us to bring these workshops online.
Yeah.
I
I
wanted
think you get better attendance in the future if you do it online. You know,
Thank
for something like this, I mean, there was no, well, hands-on is always a little bit better, but this was quite thorough.
Thank you so much, Jenny. And I'm just wondering, question for the audience. Is there anybody who wants to share any success stories or tips that you have about starting seeds from home?
I can't think of any.
I use paper cups to start them. It just seems like it's cheaper rather than buying the ready-made containers
Yep.
for the food.
Or egg cartons.
Curtains. Yeah.
Yeah. Egg cartons, some of them are biodegradable too, so you can put them right in the ground and they'll disintegrate.
Good idea, yeah.
We have somebody saying that they like to use toilet paper tubes.
Yeah. If you can get it now.
Everything's going down the tubes. Me, something I like to do that's kind of unusual is I'll take, if any kind of food I have comes in like a Ziploc bag, I'll take a hole puncher, I'll punch holes in the bottom of the Ziploc bag, and I'll fill that with soil. Make little soil bags.
Oh, that's neat. Yeah. What do you put those into though?
I mean, I put them on a tray.
Oh, I see. Okay.
On a tray, I've got a little shelving unit set up.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know if how you get like drink carriers and I think they're biodegradable. Are those possible to plant in?
Drink carriers.
Like if you go to like fast food or something, they'll put 4 drinks in one of those. Are those possible to reuse? My mother saved those for me, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah, probably. Most all cardboard, will break down as long as it doesn't have like a wax coating, maybe, or like a coating on it.
Okay.
Yeah, probably would.
Kyle, could you maybe walk us through, for beginner seed starters, what are some of the best, most successful seeds to start? And what are some things that, are better to kind of get as transplants, maybe worth an experiment?
Yeah. So, a lot of things that maybe take a little bit longer of a season to start. So the peppers and tomatoes, you start, 6 to 8 weeks before the last frost. Onions, I started onions late February. And so if you're new to taking care of seedlings, some of those longer crops, like Denny was saying, it might even be a little too late for the tomatoes. Those are things that maybe you want to think about buying, but things that you could start easily, lettuce, most greens that aren't, a lot of times lettuce you can direct seed even and it'll do great. But if you want a nice lettuce transplant or a head of lettuce, you can start them just a little bit early, and then they're really quick to grow, and then they go in. Other things like kale or collards, other types of greens, the Chinese cabbage or bok choy, a lot of those type of cabbages are quite easy. They germinate really quickly, and they go out in the field really quickly. Regular cabbages can be a little bit trickier because you start them a little earlier. Yeah, good question though. I don't know. I can't really think of anything else offhand that, I think the greens are definitely oftentimes the easiest because you have to take care of them for the least amount of time. Yeah.
Are there any fruit trees or anything that can actually work well in Binghamton?
fruit trees. Yeah, definitely. Here at the farm, we've got a couple different varieties of pears, Asian pears and European pears, and we also have a couple different varieties of apples, which we just planted last year. And pawpaws are a different one, but yeah, you for a lot of the fruits like that, and for vegetables, it's good to know the hardiness zone. And so here in Binghamton, we're like in between, we're like a 5B maybe, almost 6. Soon probably will be a 6. But the way that works is it has to do with the average or minimum low that the winters get to. And so the fruit trees, if you plant something that's hardy to a zone 7, and we get a normal winter in Binghamton, it's going to get so cold that it'll kill that tree over the winter. And so the main thing you want to look at is the hardiness zone and what those trees are rated to.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
And Kyle, I mean, a lot of these fruit trees, we're not starting from seed, right? You normally want to get it from a transplant or maybe from a cutting.
Yep, good question. Yeah, good point. Yeah, the a lot of time, especially fruits like apples and pears, are grafted actually varieties. And so if you were to save some seeds from an apple that you really liked, it's not going to produce apples like that apple. It's going to have random genetic mutations that produce something completely different. You might get lucky, 1 in a million maybe, but oftentimes, yeah, those tree seedlings are grafted fruits. So yeah, that's a good point, Christina. Thank you.
Which fruits are good for a field that is very wet?
Yeah. Let's see. Well, apples and pears definitely like well drained and don't like having wet roots. I've got some wet spots at my house, and I grow a lot of. Somebody mentioned actually currants are easy. Currants really enjoy some wetter spots. Also, the acidity. A lot of the soil around here is really acidic, and so blueberries can do really well in acidic soil, and they might tolerate a bit of wetness as well. In terms of like bigger fruit trees, pawpaws are, we're like right on the edge where you can grow pawpaws, but they are more of like a river bottom fruit tree species. So, they can handle a bit more moisture, but they like fertile soil.
I always thought of those as southern though. Don't
Pawpaw?
they need a warmer climate?
Yeah, they're hardy to zone 6 about. And there's some varieties that are maybe hardy to zone 5. We've got a couple trees here at the farm. We're right in the city though. And so, yeah, outside of the city, it might get a bit colder and you'll be right on the edge. But if it's in a protected spot, it could do all right. What happened to our pawpaw trees last year though is because it is right on the edge, they tend to flower kind of early. And then they have the chance of getting a late frost that'll kill the flowers. Same with a lot of different, if you were to plant apples or pears or something, if you have an early flowering variety or an early fruiting variety, they're going to flower earlier in the spring, and then they're more at risk for being damaged by the frost. So later bearing varieties usually have better success in terms of that. But pawpaws are generally, I think they're native to like the Ohio River Valley and a little bit like Appalachia, but we're right on the edge.
Okay.
And probably in 6 to 10 years, when it's going to start bearing fruit, they'll be in perfect climate. So.
Yeah, true. So blueberry bushes and currant bushes would be better than trying to go for something else.
Yeah, I would say so. And, look around online too for other, wet loving fruits. Perhaps you could find something that I'm not familiar with. Fruits aren't my specialty, but I know a little bit.
I was just something to soak up the moisture of this field because it's pretty wet. Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of really beautiful willows out there as well. If you want something that has some fruit to it, yeah, that might. But a lot of the willows, I've got a lot of willows at my house in wet spots, and they provide a lot of pollen sources for bees and stuff. So they're good for the environment at times, and they're really beautiful, often in foliage. But
Mhm.
yeah, looks like we got a question
Okay.
from Robin. I planted some sort of pea in November to put nitrogen into my soil. Lovely green carpet on my bed. Do I just till it in when I compost? Yeah, so growing a cover crop there. That's a great question out in the field. Oftentimes, yeah, cover crops, we direct seed. I planted a pea oat mix and some clover and some oats, a couple different cover crop mixes a couple weeks ago, and they're just starting to come up. And usually what I do to incorporate a cover crop, like peas, are I mow it down. We've got a flail mower, so it like chops it into really fineness, or you can just mow it with a regular mower. And then if you have the ability to till it, you can till it in and it'll break down pretty quick. Another way though is you can just mow it, and then if you have like a big black piece of plastic or something, you can lay that over it. And that's what a lot of no-till farmers will do, is they'll mow down a cover crop and then put the compost right on top of that mown cover crop in that field, and then put black plastic over it. That's actually what I'm doing in our hoop house right now. I had some spinach that overwintered. I just mowed it down last Friday, put down like an inch of compost, and then I've got heavy black plastic on top of it. And so that'll kill anything that's trying to grow up through it. It'll stop the spinach from growing, kill the spinach, and that stuff will slowly start to break down over the course of 2 to 3 weeks. Sometimes it might take about a month, straight oculation like that to kill stuff underneath it.
What if it's just on my garden bed, like it's a community garden bed plot? It's just all over the top of that. It's just that.
Oh yeah, so that would be, you could, chop it down, mow it, and you could either till it in, or if you wanted to, you could pull those out and put them into your compost. And then, you'd be recycling the nutrients anyways. And, you're creating green manure essentially to add to your compost. So it's either composting in your compost bin or right on the bed. Either way, you're recycling the nutrients, and the cover crop is, grabbing those nutrients. If there wasn't anything growing in the bed, the soil would be leaching nutrients down into the subsoil. And so if you've got something growing there year round that holds those nutrients there, and then you recycle them either right into the bed or in your compost bin. So, yeah. You can also eat the pea shoots too, the little tendrils. Pea shoots are delicious. Yeah. Cool. Good question. The scallions. I like scallions. Is there a better type of onion to get similar to what I buy at the store? Yeah, so actually I grow a bunch of scallions at the farm here. It's one of my favorite vegetables, actually. My heater's coming on. Talk a little louder, maybe. Yeah, so scallions are, I usually grow a variety called Nebicon. There's a lot of different varieties, though, and they're pretty easy. Hold on, actually, a second. I've got a tray here. So this is my scallion tray. And the scallions, I plant quite a few in each cell. So you can see there's like 5 to 7 seeds in each cell. And these were planted, I believe, about 2 or 3 weeks ago. Scallions are the one things that I don't label because it's the only thing that I plant in the 72 flats that looks like this. Yeah, so scallions are quite easy to grow, and you can grow them almost any time of the year. They don't like real hot weather in the summer, but you can grow them through the summer. You can grow them in the fall, or you can put them out in the early spring. Scallions, if you haven't grown any type of onion before, scallion would be a good one to start with. And these are just not a perennial type scallion. Like there's chives, are a different type of perennial herb. This is more like your nice white blanched bottom scallion that you would use for like kimchi or different cooking like that. But good question.
Mhm.
Cool. Well, it's about 5:30 now. Are there any other questions before we wrap this up? Thank you all for being so engaged.
It was great.
Cool.
Great.
Yeah.
Sorry I was late. So.
Oh, yeah. Cool.
The PDF is still available, right?
Mm-hmm. PDF is available. The other thing I wanted to put out there is that if you would like any of these materials mailed to you over US postal mail, like if you want it printed out, we can send that to you. Vines does have some seeds available. We've distributed them to the site coordinators of our different community gardens. If you're not a community garden member, but you're interested in certain kinds of seeds, you can email us and see what we can mail to you. And one final thing, I think we all owe Kyle a huge thank you.
Thank you, Kyle.
And I'm going to send out in the chat window, and it's also in your email, we have a survey. And we're going to ask you, it's very important for you to fill out this survey and give us feedback so that way we know how to do better programming in the future, especially now that we're transitioning to an online format. The more feedback you can give us, the better.
Great. I have a community garden in Green right near the the senior apartments. And we're kind of still having a hard time getting some of the seniors interested in participating, but we donate all the vegetables to the food pantry. So, but I still have a garden at home too, and I'm trying to figure out how to make best use of the land around the house. I've got 13 acres.
Wow.
So yeah, that's why I was asking Kyle about the wet part of the land. It's a bummer. It's really
Actually,
too wet to do anything with.
another fruit that I know loves wet soil is elderberries. I don't know if you've elderberries. They're kind of a different fruit. A lot of people just make a syrup out of them or something, but elderberries love wet soil, and
There's another fruit, I can't think of it, but it's got a strange name. It's like currants, but it's
Gooseberries?
what are they?
Gooseberries, maybe?
Yeah, I think they're like gooseberries. They're those, and there's one other one. I can't remember the name of it.
How about huckleberries?
That could be it. Yeah. But I couldn't tell the difference between one or the other, so I would have to know what I was planning. Anyway, that's where I'm at.
one other thing that I should mention to everybody that's still here, if you are a community garden member, or even if you're not and you're in the Binghamton area, I always start a whole lot of extra seedlings, and so we try and distribute those out to the community garden members. Last year, I think we ran out of a couple different things, but we always get a bunch of transplants donated to us, which we try to get out to people that are interested in gardening. So if you are interested in that, reach out to me or Christina at any time, and we can hook you up with a couple of transplants perhaps as well.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah. All right.
I just sent the link out in the chat window. I'm also going to send a follow-up email with a video recording of this presentation and any kind of other additional resources. But if you could please fill out the survey to give us feedback, we would really appreciate it.
Okay. That's great.
So thank you so much, everyone.
Creation was going to be.
Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you.
OPD officer up on it.
Thank you. Bye.